Hey everyone, welcome to Decelerator. I'm your host, Rob Kennedy, and today we'll be talking to Natasha Ross from FreightSimple. But first, we're going to talk about enshittification. What's enshittification, you may ask? Well, I call it poopification because I am a child. But enshittification was coined by a gentleman named Cory Doctorow. He's a sci-fi author, a creator of Boing Boing, and just a general tech thinker. And he means generally that over time, the quality of products, specifically digital products, just tend to get worse over time. And a perfect example today, I would say, we see it in real time, is Meta. Yep, Meta, if you remember, over the last few weeks had introduced AI bots to encourage engagement and then took them away. And they just announced that they are no longer moderating themselves any of the content on the platform. They're just leaving it up to the community itself, which of course always leads to good outcomes, right? Twitter. But this affects more than just social networks. One corner of the internet that it's really affecting is the bobbin lace making community. Yes, that does exist. Their big scandal is that somebody has been taking all of their written content and images and have been publishing AI based books on Amazon that they are selling. In fact, this creator has a video literally going page by page through a 144-page book pointing out the mistakes that the AI has made. It's good late night watching. This, of course, takes money from sales of real bobbin lace manuals like my own. I have three: a Lace Odyssey, Ace of Lace, and my Rest and Bobbin Lace Face. It's harmless but annoying, but it can get a little more impactful. So one place in shitification you don't want it to exist, but it's existing, is in science. As of a couple of years ago, when ChatGPT 3.5 came out, you would find in science journals literal sentences saying, "I'm an AI, I can't help you with that," published in the journal. For peer reviewers to manage this glut, now they've been turning to AI to actually filter out the slop that's been shoveled their way. And unfortunately, this is how you get things like this. Yes, this is a journal article with a rat with a gigantic testicle. This made it into a journal article and actually had to be pulled. So we're fighting a gigantic fire hose in both directions, and we really don't want it to go into science. And where could it actually go? Well, let's look in the other direction. Let's look towards the future, and let's look at Netflix. Netflix is a subscription model. Unlike the old days where you had a TV ad and that TV ad would pay for the thing that you were watching, the customer here is you and me, the consumer. Their goal is not necessarily to put out content, although that is ideal. Their goal is to just get you to not unsubscribe. So basically, once they figure out what the niches that people like, whatever they happen to be, as long as you feel like you're covered, you just need to not unsubscribe. So you can imagine a future where you, unlike me, like crazy UFO conspiracy documentaries. As long as you think there are more of that content on Netflix than exists today, you're not going to unsubscribe. And you can imagine a future where you just spin up an episode based on demand. Like AI could just create an episode out of whole cloth for you. So if you're into true crime or late stage Adam Sandler, this is the era for you. I think the thread that's connecting all this is sort of literacy over time. So 50, 60, 70 years ago, it was about media literacy. And we have some amount of media literacy and understand the idea of bias. Social media literacy is about 10 years old, 15 years old at this point. I think we're slowly getting the idea that there maybe aren't good actors on these platforms. There could be robots, there could be disinformation. You just know it's a bit of a mess. AI literacy, finally, is really new. And we don't really know what to do with it. We don't know how to spot it. And it'll see how long it takes us to actually be competent with it. How long will it take us to get there? We don't know yet. And now, our guest. My guest today is Natasha Ross, founder of FreightSimple. FreightSimple is a B2B logistics business based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Basically, if you're a company and you're shipping commercially between or within a country, this is the service you would use. It was a really candid and wide-ranging chat about what the business is about, obviously, but prospective exits, co-founder compensation, her co-founder exited to Apple, and more. We went places you normally don't go with a company that's post-product market fit, but still is in the scaling phase. So let's go. Well, Natasha, thank you for joining us on Decelerator. Really appreciate you coming.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
I guess let's have your elevator pitch for Freight Simple.
Okay, I've done this a million times. Yeah, so Freight Simple, we like to think it's kind of like Expedia for shipping. So it's a one-stop shop where you can quote book and track your freight all across Canada and the US. So what that looks like, if you were a manufacturer of flooring, for example, you needed to move a pallet from Vancouver to New York City. Traditionally, that process is really difficult. So you would call up, a freight carrier, you'd sit on hold for half an hour, you get passed around 6 times, you finally get through to somebody, have to pass a credit check that can take weeks. You got to negotiate freight rates, which who even knows how to do that? And then, finally set up an account. Getting a quote could be a lot of calls and emails. And then if you want to shop around, you got to repeat that process a bunch of times. So basically, how Freight Simple works is our customers come to our website. It's usually small to medium sized manufacturing companies across Canada and the US. And they're trying to move, products that they're making from their warehouse to the next end of the supply chain. So they just type in what they're looking to ship, fill in a couple, simple pieces of info. They get a list of options instantly,
Mhm.
and they click the one they want to go with. So it instantly fills out the documents for them, books the pickup, and then it's so much more than that. All of their tracking's in one place, so they can watch the whole movement, from A to B, and all of the financial management, everything's there. So it just beats calling, emailing, faxing. It's all instant and very easy to use.
And most importantly, it's B2B, right? So it's not something that I would use to send you a package. It's I'm running a business. I need to import, export, move a pallet or something across a country.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
business to business. Really, like I said, small to medium sized manufacturing companies, people that are making things. So
Mhm.
everything, around us, on us, came on a truck somehow, and nobody really knows how that works. So it's helping, companies to get something from where they're manufacturing it to, their end user, which could also be a company, for example, or a distributor.
Right.
So that's what we focus on. Yeah, and it's
And
LTL, so it's not parcel. I want to clarify, it's
LTL means
LTL means less than truckload.
yes.
So that essentially looks like 1 to 6 pallets is generally LTL. So less than truckload, you're not filling up the entire thing,
Hmm.
but it's bigger than a box or a parcel. So you're kind of
Right.
taking up some space in a truck.
Right. And I did some reading before just so I knew jargon would show up. And when you do less than truckload, that truck makes multiple stops as opposed to, is that correct? As opposed to one single destination? It just does a bunch of stuff because they have to deliver stuff, or is that not? Did I not read the
Yeah,
right thing?
that's true. So it's kind of like a
Okay.
hub and spoke system. So basically, how that actually functions, what it looks like is the carrier shows up, they're going to pick up your pallet. During that day, they're picking up a bunch of pallets. So they're in your, industrial area. They're stopping at your place, they're stopping at your neighbors, they're stopping a few blocks away. They're
Right.
bringing all these pallets back to a centralized terminal where they're going to divide it all across the dock and put it on different trucks going to different areas across the country or the
Cool.
continent. So, yeah, it goes through many terminals on its way.
And before a Freight Simple existed, what did you do? Did you just phone up all the trucking companies and say, "Do you got an empty truck? Can I have an empty truck, please?" Like, how did that?
That is not unlike what actually happens. Yeah. So the industry is wild. It is very much phone calls, emails. So, you would call up a freight company, hope somebody picks up. They say, yeah, we can move it, here's your rate. But if you have an account, we can negotiate pricing for you. Nobody really knows how to do that. There's lots of different pricing models. The industry is incredibly dynamic. And, even to book that pickup, you might be sending an email hoping, somebody actually replies today. Hey, we need to get this out the door today. Can you do that? And then you're sitting in the dark for 6 hours. And then you have to fill out your documents, which I don't know if you've ever seen a bill of lading. You need a
Unfortunately,
PhD
I
to fill it
have,
out,
and I don't know how to. Yeah,
right?
I've seen them be shipped towards me too, and I'm like, I don't know what.
Oh,
I'm going to open the box. I don't understand what's happening on this piece of
it's
paper or
it's
these pieces.
absurd, right? And I mean, a lot of those are filled out by hand, or they might be filled out online on like a digital form. But either way, traditionally a customer has to fill that out. And if you fill it out incorrectly, your shipment might end up on the other side of the continent by accident.
Right.
You're paying
Right.
for that. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And we've always thought, in this industry, it's kind of the last place that tech has really touched, that these are
Yeah.
problems that are solvable, by use of tech, but it's really sort of the last place that I think tech people have looked at.
Right.
And for God's sakes, we send people to space for fun these days. There's no reason why we can't automate filling out a bill of lading.
That's true. Although weirdly, we forgot. I don't know if you know this nerdy fact, but we actually have forgotten how to send people to the moon, so we have to relearn it. Believe it or not, because it was so
It's true.
long ago. It's kind of sad. But what's interesting about the business too is, I was doing some reading before our interview, and like just looking at some of the U.S. stats, and you happen to be on the west coast of Canada, right? You're in Vancouver.
That's right.
Much of the shippers uh, in the States, I think it was 95.5% operate fewer than 10 trucks, and 99.6% operate the fewer than 100 trucks. And in Canada, it's like
That's right.
82.3% were considered micro, less than 5 employees. So like there's 577,000 motor carriers in the United States,
Yeah.
which probably means there's a much smaller number in Canada. But we're
Yeah.
talking about like B to SMB type of stuff, like not these huge trucks that are like, I'm moving everything to Costco. That's the 0.4% that is happening. Is that
Yeah.
it's a fragmented small market?
Extremely
Yeah.
fragmented.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is where we're kind of different from
Okay.
like an Uber Freight or, Convoy, what they were trying to do, for example. So we
Hmm.
work with the, 0.4%, like the big, large established freight companies. So
Hmm.
everyone's heard of FedEx. They have a freight division. They're asset based. They own their trucks. They have their drivers are employees. Same thing with Old Dominion Freight Line. There's large carriers that have been in existence for a long time. They might be national, they cover the whole nation. They might be regional or hyper, local. So we work with them. And the reason being is, there are a lot of guys with trucks. It's a low barrier to entry. You can buy a semi truck and start picking up freight and
Hmm.
moving it.
Hmm. Hmm.
The only issue, especially with, being us starting and being a small company, is a lot of the guys with the trucks don't necessarily have tracking. They don't necessarily have automated billing. All of that stuff is very complicated. And when you start doing it at scale, it really helps to piggyback off of the infrastructure that exists with the large carriers.
Yeah.
So they have a billing department, they have tracking, they might have varying levels of technology. Their tracking might literally just be someone sending an email saying, oh, this has now arrived into Winnipeg, it's going to Toronto next. So yeah, that's really what we've strategically gone after.
Yeah.
And the industry is huge. I mean, the Canadian freight logistics market is 106 billion. In the US, it's five and a half billion, or 532
Okay.
billion, I think, in 2024 they're predicting. So yeah, I mean, just the entire North America freight and logistics market, the projected market value in 2020 or by 2031 is 2 trillion. Like, it's huge. So there's room for a lot of players. But that creates a lot of chaos.
And you're truck only, correct? Not trains or boats or planes or cats or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No
Okay.
horses and buggies. We're truck only. However, that being said, a lot of carriers actually do put their freight on a train at some point.
Yeah.
So this is very common across Canada and the US. You'll have a truck pick up your pallet, and then to
Hmm.
move it across the country, it might go on rail at some point.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we use a mix of carriers that are truck only, and some also do put freight on rail cars as well.
Right. So it's kind of like, and then to the end user, it is transparent. The shipper, it's transparent about how it gets there. You just know that it's coming. And it's interesting
Yeah.
that you've chosen a hard. I mean, we'll get to this in a second, but it's like, oh gosh, these, you know, maybe they're not also super tech savvy. They might be like, I want a truck and I want to drive. I don't care about, I care about tracking, but this is just not a thing I care about. So it's like a big, wide market that
Yeah.
will probably require some amount of education and like, hey, there's a thing here
Yeah.
you can do. Did you know you can do?
Exactly. So I think our customer base is really interesting, and just the customer base of this industry is really interesting. So,
Yeah.
we work mostly with small and medium-sized businesses. That could mean, our user using Freight Simple, or the person that controls shipping decisions, could be someone who pushes a broom across the shop floor. They're being paid minimum wage, but they oversee a multi-million-dollar annual freight spend.
Hmm.
It could also mean that it's the CEO of a medium-sized company who takes it upon themselves to make the shipping decisions. So there's in everything in between that, there's varying degrees of, experience in logistics. Some people understand how to fill out a bill of lading, a lot of people don't. um, and so we really tried to make a product and a platform that is usable by anybody regardless of your experience. You could have a PhD in logistics, or you could have never seen a pallet in your life before. It should really be paint by numbers, so that's what we've created. um, Again,
So
because there's just so much complexity with how freight
yeah,
moves.
clearly. Let's not get into it anymore because I'm a nerd, but I think most people would be
Yeah.
like, that's cool.
Yeah.
So uh, and you do come by it honestly, but um, tell us, like, you started this company in 2019.
Hmm.
Um, you tell us how you got here. Like, were you just bored one day and you're like, you know what I could fix?
Yeah, so we really started in 2021. The idea kind of came to me in 2019.
Hmm.
So, I was at the time I was working for a huge US freight carrier called Old Dominion Freight Line. Incredible company. So we always joke they're kind of like the Ferrari of freight carriers. They've
Okay.
been around for over 100 years, very established national company. And so they've got, 25,000 employees in the US, and they had just a handful in Canada. So I think there was 14 of us, and I'm not sure if that's actually even changed since. But so at the time I was overseeing the Vancouver market. My job was basically to build the business up here. So
Hmm.
I specifically dealt in cross-border freight. So, signing up new accounts, getting them to ship from Canada to the US on Old Dominion. So I remember, that experience. I was getting to know these customers, and I'm watching the process, and it wasn't a great experience for them. Like, they're having to call me, and I'm having to, get them a freight quote, and I'm having to, track their shipments for them, or they're trying to use a website that's really difficult to use. And for the carrier, they're spending a lot of time, trying to chase around freight that might be lost because a bill of lading wasn't filled out correctly. There's a lot of pressure on their support teams. It just was very inefficient and wasn't a lovely experience for the customers, even though that really was, in many ways the best that the industry has to offer. Um, and they do a great job of moving the freight, but a lot of the things when it comes to, quoting it and getting it on the truck and all the things that happen in between can be not a great experience. So I remember thinking, my goodness, if somebody could just create like Expedia for shipping and sort of automate all of this, it would be a much better experience for the customer, that hardwood flooring company that needs to move their pallet to a distribution warehouse somewhere. And then also, it would just easily funnel freight to these carriers. They wouldn't have to spend all their time, their support staff wouldn't be on the phone constantly for an hour trying to track down a shipment. They wouldn't be sending reps out trying to get, all this freight from people in warehouses walking through the back door. So basically, I thought, why is this not automated? Um, so that idea started sort of marinating in my mind. And then I met my co-founder socially, and he came from tech. That was his entire background.
Hmm.
And so I kind of pitched the idea, and I was like, I don't know, I feel like there's something here. And it marinated for a while. And then 2021 was really when, we started kind of taking it seriously and building it from there.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's very common. It's like you're an entrepreneurial type person. You see the pain in your world, and you're like, I know how to
Mhm.
solve this problem, or at least I think this is a problem big enough that I should actually solve. How did
Yeah.
you, you know, when were you like, I think I'm going to quit my job and go after this for zero salary?
Yes. So 2020, the
Yeah.
pandemic hit. So I remember, you mentioned 2019, that was when the idea started to
Yeah.
marinate.
I guess nothing matters before the pandemic anymore anyway, right? It doesn't
Yeah,
matter
what
what happened.
I
2020
don't
is what
even
matters.
don't even know what year it is anymore.
Yeah.
But so I remember saying, I just feel like the logistics industry is so broken. Something's going to happen that kind of proves to everybody, like, wow, this is really messed up. And then the pandemic hit, and nobody could get toilet paper. So I was working this great job. I mean, that role wasn't going anywhere. That company isn't going anywhere. But I just wanted something more. And, I maybe I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit, but I just wasn't satisfied. So the world was kind of going to hell. I think we were all in it. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And I was, in my late mid 20s. And I thought, if you're going to take a risk, now is probably the time.
Yeah.
So I couldn't really do anything about it. While I was at my last role, I learned a ton, but I thought, if I'm going to jump into this, I need to make a cut, take some time, and then figure out what Freight Simple is going to look like. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
left Old Dominion in fall of 2020, and whew, I
So,
mean,
so
it
okay.
was
So you're like, hey, the world is ending.
the
This
world is
is
ending.
well, like in March, it was like the world is ending. We're all going to die. In October, it was, if anybody even remembers, it was like, okay, don't know what the world is like, but this seems to be the new version of the world. So you're like, I guess there's going to be pandemic forever. So you thought, I'm going to quit my job, and I'm assuming that you slept on bars of gold.
No.
No.
So you know what? I always think you need to preface if you bootstrapped a company, do you have a trust fund? Like, I don't hear this enough from founders. They're like, I bootstrapped my business. I'm like, did daddy give you $1 million?
I hope to
Uh,
not get those people on my show. That's all I got to say. Trying to do some due diligence, but yes, absolutely. This is why we asked the question, which is like,
yeah,
it's not what is the risk you're taking. I agree with you. I think if you're like super rich or
it's
you're
an
super
easier
poor,
choice.
quite honestly,
Yeah.
what choice do you have? If you have any
Yeah.
possessions and any income and any responsibilities, and you promise anybody anything,
Hmm.
now you have that's the risk, isn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. So to clarify, no trust fund. I grew up in a small town. I went to like kind of like a community college, basically equivalent. So
Mm-hmm.
it was all I knew was the hustle. So, I left this great job. I had some savings, I was like, this can float me for a while, but it's not going to be, life's not going to be cushy.
Yeah.
It was a huge, huge, huge risk. Lots of mental breakdowns for sure. I don't want to gloss that over. It wasn't just, you have to be a little bit crazy, but also you have to understand the level of risk you're taking.
Right.
Especially because our plan was to not raise any funding. So no VC
Why?
funding.
Like, isn't it was, I mean, 2020, 2021 capital money was free at that point. You could raise by
Yeah.
looking somebody in the eye and asking them for money, basically.
Yes,
What's
totally. So a few reasons. So I had a little bit of personal runway financially where I was like, let's just try this out, come up with an MVP or a minimum lovable product, we like to call
Mhm.
it. But
Mhm.
so my co-founder Chris,
What does that mean? Does it mean it's like more than MVP but less than the full thing?
yeah, I feel like we've never looked at a functioning product as like good enough. For us,
Yeah.
it's always like, it should be something that solves a problem, is really beautiful to use. And even our MVP should have been something that, you know, and we'll get into that because that's actually something I'd love to explore about sitting
Sure.
side by side and building around a core group of customers. But
Mhm.
we always split the details from day one. Um, so yeah, why
But that's
didn't we
dangerous, right?
raise?
Like, I mean, we've done this for a long time, and what you did, like, well, this is the MVP, yeah, but it's not enough, and then you end up spending money and time building up the whole damn thing.
Yeah,
'Cause everyone thinks they're building an MVP,
for sure.
and they
For sure.
actually usually aren't. They're usually building a bigger thing, and they're spending more money and time building the thing. So how do you? I know we're going to get to it, but how do you? And you, in your case, you didn't have unlimited capital to futz around. How do you say, no, 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 this is more than viable, but just lovable? And like, how do you stop?
Well, I think so. There's a few things to that. I think that we really, and I especially had a really deep understanding of what the problem is. So, what are the pain points in this industry? What is the vision for the product that we're trying to build? Like, what
Mhm.
problems does it solve, and how
Mhm.
can we solve those?
Mhm.
So, initially, what we did was get, a core group of 15 customers, for example, 15 potential users, very different types of companies, every problem under the sun. And I literally went to their warehouses and I sat shoulder to shoulder with them at their computer and I said, show me how you move this from here to there. What
Mhm.
is the process? What are you doing right now? And I just soaked it in. I was looking at, every mouse click, every time they sat on the phone for half an hour listening to bad hold music. I was just watching all this go down. And I was like, I can't believe you're spending 6 hours a day doing something that should take 5 minutes.
Mhm.
So then I asked them, I was like, in your wildest dreams, if you could make magic happen, what
Mhm.
would this look like? What would this process look like to you? and what are the biggest problems you're trying to solve. Wrote all that down and then brought it back. And basically we were like, okay, every single thing from creating an account, getting a quote, what is that? What should that look and feel like? And it was really simple at first because we're kind of naive, you're always building around the best case scenario. And then of course all the fringe things come in and you have to
Yeah.
start changing. But I
Yeah.
think initially we just needed to build around the best case scenario for a few very different companies and then even just pick one customer that is a really
Hmm.
good representation of, who we're looking to solve for and make it amazing for them.
Got it.
So that's kind of what we did.
Okay, so that's how you made it lovable. It's like really optimized for one use case, one human or one like
Yeah.
scenario, and then
Hmm.
kind of go from there and make got it. So and then I interrupted my question was a question where you were going was like, hey yo, I had a bit of savings. So I said, why didn't
Yeah.
you take
Why
money
didn't we
when money was
raise?
falling off of trees? And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
well, one is I had a little bit.
Yeah. So a few things as well. So Chris, my co-founder, he needed to learn the industry. So,
Yes.
him personally, he didn't want to raise immediately for an industry that he didn't fully understand yet. So a big part of, the first little bit was Chris learning about freight. Like how does freight move? How does it work? What are the actual problems? Who are our customers? Um, and then further to that, Chris had also, previously founded a company and had sold it. It was acquired by Apple. Um, so he'd been through the kind of VC raising, from day one to exit. He'd been through that whole process.
Hmm.
And they had a really great experience with it. I mean, honestly, it turned out fantastically for them. They built a great product. It was loved by many. But of course, when you've been through that cycle, you're going to kind of take notes about what you do differently next time.
Yeah.
Um, and then, of course, he brought a lot of wisdom as to, if he were to do it all over again, what can we avoid? How can we retain more equity? And how far can you go just with your own skill set as well? I
Yeah.
think it's very easy to quickly jump on, capital's cheap, grabbing
Especially
a
if
bunch of
you've
cash.
exited to Apple at
Yeah.
a time that capital's cheap, and if you've taken venture capital, and you turn back to the VCs and say, "Hey, I'm doing this again," they're going to be like, "Well, you exited to Apple, so here's more money."
Yeah.
Because a lot of, but his perspective was like, was this I want to try something different, or was this I want more control? Is this I'm tired? Like, what was
Yeah.
do you have a
Well,
sense of what that was? I know he's not here, so let's speak for him.
for sure. Yeah, no, for sure. Nothing's free, right?
Yeah,
Nothing's ever free. So,
yeah,
there's a lot of additional pressures that come by being a venture backed company. So now you're under someone else's timeline.
yes.
We would have had someone in our ear telling us what to build, how to build it. We felt that if we could go slow and lean, we could keep the emphasis really on the customer experience and truly innovate.
Mhm.
So a lot of people have tried to solve this problem, and they throw more people at the problem rather than solving by like true tech innovation. And we see
Right.
this with a lot of our competitors. You
Yeah.
raise a bunch of initial venture capital, or raise a couple rounds, and we really do think that scarcity is the foundation of innovation.
Hmm.
When you
Hmm.
can't just throw a person at the job, you really have to think about like what is the problem? Why does it exist in the first place? And how can we build automated processes around solving it?
Right.
So that was
So
always our
is that to
approach.
say like speed for speed's sake in this particular market was not a asset, or am I putting words in your mouth?
We, I mean, we always say that slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Right.
So, there's not a lot of true innovation in the industry. Um, there are a lot of companies with really nice looking websites where you try to go get a quote and then it's like, yeah, we'll email you. So
Right.
you
Right.
realize it's an office. There's brokers with,
A
a
person.
nice
Yeah.
website and there's offices with 100 people on the phone and sending emails. That's not really innovating. It's not really anything novel to the industry. So we really, the other side of that was call me old fashioned, but I wanted to build a company that had strong legs, actually made money, wasn't just a growth at all costs endeavor.
Hmm.
Um, and, had some longevity to it.
Yeah.
So the other thing too was, if we wanted to make money from the beginning, we didn't win a lot of volume. Like we had to win volume, but you tend to lose them a lot of margin to get those new customers. We didn't really have that option. Like every time someone books a piece of freight, we're booking it with the carrier. We're the customer of the carrier. We need to
Right.
pay them. Our
Right.
customer pays us. So
Right.
there's real money changing hands, and there's a real thing being picked up by a real person in a truck to move across a country or a continent. So we wanted to just figure that out because if you start throwing tons of money at scaling really quickly and you realize that that process is broken, you're
Hmm.
going to sink the ship really quickly.
Right.
So we had to figure out how to actually make that work. And then once we could figure that out on a tiny scale, we could grow from there.
Yeah, and then do you find that like so you there are, as you said, there's competitors in your space. There's one, I believe, in your actual market that started a bit before you that claims at
Mhm.
least or seems to do what you do.
Yeah.
Um, and and you're right. I mean, like there's no fundamental, like you're not building a new AI chatbot that never existed before. Like you're not inventing technology out of whole cloth. You understand how the machine works, and you're applying whatever coolness exists today to make it a better user experience. Did you think about, well, there's other people doing this. Obviously, there's a market, you know. Did you think about like, well, what's my moat then, or what makes my company different? If there are other people with capital and they're using money
Yeah.
as a weapon,
Yeah.
what? How are you thinking about that?
That's a good question. So I really think it comes back to our user experience and
Hmm.
just true innovation. So, kind of like I said, you can throw money at people to solve problems, but we really wanted to truly innovate. And there is not a lot of true innovation in this industry. Really great engineers are not going to be attracted to working for a trucking company.
But
They're
is
going to
it
go
also
to
like
Google.
if you think about it, the humans on the other side of it, this is the problem with sort of, I don't want to say laggard, but later adopter
Mhm.
type of industries where the humans in them are like, I don't know what Trello is on a Kanban board. You can make the nicest looking Kanban board if you want. I don't know what this is and I don't want it. I just want the bill of lading. You know what I mean? Like, so
Exactly.
is there
Exactly.
something there too?
Yes. So we
Okay.
built everything in-house. We're not
Yeah.
using bolt-on software to make Freight Simple work. So
Right.
everything about what we built is completely proprietary. So again, back to the formation, we were like, if we were to make this look and feel like magic, what does that mean? How would it
Hmm.
function?
Hmm.
And that was honestly Chris in the early days just writing really great code.
Okay.
And just creating things out of thin air. And I think because, he wasn't from the industry, there wasn't anyone in his ear kind of telling him how things should work or how things should
Right.
go. So that really allowed for true innovation. And it also tied in a lot with his previous experience. Buddy Build was a company that he'd founded and they gave a really great experience for developer tools.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it was taking, a really kind of complicated process, making it really clear, usable, beautiful, all that kind of thing. So this was kind of another iteration of that challenge for him.
Yeah.
So under the hood with Freight Simple, everything we've built is completely automated, proprietary. We did it all ourselves because we didn't want to. Um, we weren't impressed with the innovation we were seeing that was
Right.
already out there.
And again, on the adoption side, did you learn something about, well, like we just make a mobile app and you download the mobile app and it sends it? No. Did you learn anything once you can make amazing technology if the humans on the other side of it aren't using it? Did you learn anything about how or they do or do not use technology where you thought there was a thing and you're like, actually, this is not a thing at all. They should do it this way, but no
Yes.
one's ready to do it this way.
Yes. Oh my gosh, hugely. I think that's such a important point, because we're building tech for not tech people.
Yeah.
And I think people in tech tend to kind of exist in an echo chamber where you make all these assumptions about how people want to use things or how they actually use a product. And we're building tech for people that in a lot of ways the tech industry's forgotten about them. These are the people that are doing the actual work in the world. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
truck drivers, that's a noble pursuit. Like everything had to get here on a truck.
Yes.
Um, there's not a lot of really great tools for them, and I don't think a lot of people have taken the time to actually talk with them and see how they interact and what frustrates them and what would be something that makes their life easier. And also the people that are pushing the broom across the shop, or the stressed out small business owner who's just trying to get this contract with a big company and move all their things. So a big part of that is just really understanding how they interact with technology. um
Did you learn
And
anything? Was there anything
listening.
surprising? You're like, even though you'd been in the space, you're like, oh, what do you mean you don't? You only use text messages? Because there was a trend. There are
Yeah.
trends that come and go. One of them was
Yes.
like, no app, just text messages. Remember, I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember, there's a tool called Magic, and you could ask for things, and kind of an early
Yeah.
bot, I suppose. Anything like that that you were like, oh, you don't have a data plan?
Definitely. Definitely. Well, early on, we thought that a mobile app would be a lot more important than it actually is. So,
Okay.
and still people ask us, they're like, are you going to make a mobile app? Um, our customers aren't really doing this on their phones. They're just not. They're sitting in
Yeah.
front of a desktop
Yeah.
computer and they've got a million tabs open. They've got papers all over their desk. They're not, a mobile app is not the first place they think of going.
Makes sense.
So to this day, some people ask, it's usually people, outside asking about our company, but people within the industry are not asking for a mobile app, surprisingly, yet. Um, they just want something to work really well on desktop because that's where they spend their time, is in front of a computer. So
That
that
makes
was
sense.
surprising.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it kind of makes sense, but I'm an old person and I like to do the work at the computer, not on my phone. So I'm just like projecting what I would do.
Yeah.
So okay, so you're like burning through your cash flow, your savings. Your partner is starting to burn through his, and you are making money because you are taking money and spending money, and you probably have all of the boring problems of, oh God, they haven't paid us, but I have to pay them, like all that cash flow crap. Um,
Yeah.
were you just like, no, we can keep bootstrapping this? There was never a point at which you're like,
There
I
were
need to take a loan, like I need to get some debt. Like, did you have to think about any of that stuff, and did you do anything about that, or were you, how did you
we
stay afloat?
We thankfully did not get to a really bad crunch, but we knew that we did not have a lot of time to faff around. It was like get to revenue quickly.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, it was basically just by default of needing to get there. There were so many moments where we were like, how is this going to make money? I mean, our first shipment, we booked our first shipment. I'll never forget. It was a tea company.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like summer of, I don't know, 2022 maybe. I'm trying to remember, but it's a blur now. So Tea Company books our very first shipment. We've taken their money. Nothing works. We A lot of this stuff you can't test it until it's live.
Right.
So everything was just going off the rails and we were like hacking all these fixes and it went out the door. Everything went okay. We learned a lot from that first one, but you had to do a lot of manual processes to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So our thought was like, oh my God, how is this going to scale? Like, how are we going to get to a place where we can start making money before we run out?
And
And
was
I
the
was in
business
a
model just margin? You take a cut off the transaction. That's yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So, and my financial runway was a lot different than my co-founders.
Yes.
So I didn't have an exit to Apple.
Yes.
So very, very different situation. So nothing lights the fire under you, unlike running out of cash. So I think that we just had a very aggressive um, work ethic around getting to something that just works. I don't even know how else to explain it. I mean, there were many days where we'd say, well, should we get a bank loan? Should we, go after this government grant? But then we kept thinking, well, how would we spend this money? How would we
Mm.
actually spend this? Are we going to hire more people? Who do we actually need right now? Are we just going to give you a salary? Like, why it feels icky to take any kind of other people's money to give yourself a salary. It doesn't feel like it's not a good use of capital. So we never had a good reason for taking on money. So we just kind of kept going.
And so, like, working on the fumes of the profits that you made off of the transactions you did fulfill, basically, and some
Yeah,
savings to subsidize. Is that the two
honestly,
bits?
I didn't pay myself for 2 years. If I'm being honest, it was 2 years of not getting paid. So you just have to, I mean, I was looking at Jen, your previous podcast with the Lunch
Yeah.
Money founder.
Yeah.
You just gotta live frugally for a while. You figure it
Yeah.
out. You just figure
Yeah.
it out. I think unlike just like any other founder, you're gonna go through that period of feeling like this is going nowhere. I'm running myself into the ground, but you have that level of irrational belief in yourself and in what you're doing that hopefully you'll get to the point where it starts paying you.
You said something earlier I'd like to unpack too, about the mental, the stress, the pressure. Like sometimes you can take it and sometimes you can't take it. 2 years is a long time with no money, no matter how much soup you eat. Um, how how do you get through those? What does, you don't have to go into excruciating detail, but what does bad look like, and how did you get out of those moments? Because I'm assuming you had stuff was happening, so you're building stuff and things. There were customers, that, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I went into this doing the math. I knew what my runway could look like.
Right.
So
Two
I
years
had
and one day. Is that right? How you did it? Yeah.
basically 2 years
Okay.
and a few hours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I knew we did the math. Each one of us are doing our own separate calculations of what we can personally take on.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it was brutal. I mean, frankly, it was brutal, and you just you just have to figure it out. And I also want to acknowledge, I come from a position where I don't have kids, I don't have dependents. So, that's a huge thing. I don't want to say that anyone can just jump in and do this because that's not the case.
Sure.
And I think it's perfectly rational and fair for people to be like, I'm not willing to even try. Because it's not, the barriers to entry are high. Most people cannot go without a paycheck for 2 years. I completely get that. And so yeah, I want to acknowledge that. I think there's a lot of really amazing would-be entrepreneurs out there that just cannot take that risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that bothers me because there's a lot of talent that isn't able to actually explore that. But yeah, I mean, it was rough. And I think that, even in the beginning when I started taking a paycheck, it was nothing, like nothing,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
You have to do that constant balance of like, what can I take for myself? But as the founder, you're always going to eat last. You have to be reinvesting into this business, especially when
Hmm.
you don't have, external funding. So it was just like, how can we do this cheap, but how can we do it well?
But how did you
Thank
get through those moments where you're like, it's been a year and 3 days. I haven't paid myself. We're making money. It's not like gangbusters. So like there
Yeah.
is like, this is the thing is like, there's like, maybe you product market fit. I know there's like a, you know it when you see it kind of thing. Cool. Cool. But how long do you wait for that? Because people, you just keep bashing.
Yeah.
My experience with entrepreneurs is they bash their head against the
Mhm.
wall until nobody gives them money anymore. And then they run out
Yeah.
of money and they have to stop. That's been
Totally.
my experience. So how do you be like, I know next month is the month, not knowing it'll be 2 years, a year, a half a year, like you don't know how much more you have to.
I think you have to look at the forest for the trees,
Okay.
I think that there were so many moments where I was like, this is it, next month is it, like throwing it in. Um, we always had a level of consistent growth that was like, if we can just keep clawing our way
Right.
along, there was no indication where it's like this is going backwards. You have, and let's be honest, every entrepreneur, you'll have a month where you're like, that sucked. Like, we suck, I suck. You start extrapolating all these things where you're like,
Yes.
everybody hates us. One bad day or one bad month doesn't mean that it's a bad business or a bad life or you're necessarily doing everything wrong.
Hmm.
I think you just have to look at what is your exact position? What are you doing right? What are you actually doing wrong? Don't make mistakes twice. We just didn't have that luxury.
Right.
Um, but there were so many days. I mean, the mental load of living on a razor's edge is brutal. It's really, really brutal. And I think that, I look back at this and we have a long way to go, but we've come really far. And I think
Hmm.
that there's a level of resiliency. And I don't know if it's you just become so numb, but you build a lot of grit and resiliency because everything when you think the sky is falling, it can always fall a little more.
Yes. Yes.
And then you get over that, and then something else happens. You're like, well, I've weathered this, like, keep it coming.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that we just kept saying, like, just keep going. Just keep going. Fundamentally, things were headed in the right direction, albeit
Hmm.
slowly. And yeah, when you're bootstrapping, watching things move slow, when you're looking at the world around you and it looks like everyone's doing really well,
Yes. Yes.
I think we live in a world now where social media and every founder is very shouty and everybody wants to
Yes.
show off and say, you know, show these KPIs that seem impressive but don't tell the whole story. So you're looking around, you're like, are we missing something here? Like,
Yeah.
do we suck? But you just have to like stay in your lane, keep your head down, and just do the work.
And does that mean like, not, I find that sometimes I read LinkedIn, like it never happened to me in the social, on the consumer side, but on the LinkedIn side, I found that I would get really stressed out. I would see people doing stuff and it would kind of bum me out. And I kind of was like, maybe I should stop reading this stuff. because it just
Yeah.
makes me feel like an idiot. And I
Yep.
know, even though you intellectually know that people are, they got to look good, you got to show how good you're doing.
Yeah.
It's emotionally difficult to watch. So do you just tune it out? Do you climb a mountain? Like, what do you do to like build the resilience? How did you do that over the 2 years
You said
of
it.
zero?
Tune it out and climb a mountain. Honestly,
Okay.
yeah, I just stopped paying attention to what other people are doing,
Right.
because it doesn't matter, and it's also not the whole story. So,
Mm.
I'd listen to a lot of podcasts. I try to stay motivated, but I really think that it's important to not just be all cupcakes and rainbows. Like, it sucks. It really, really sucks. There were so many days we made $0. Even now, if we have a bad day, thank God it's not that anymore. But if
Mhm.
we have a bad day, it's still in you where you're like, oh God,
This
things
is
aren't
it.
working. But but you got to look at the general trend and just focus on that. So, tune it out, go climb a mountain. I think also, Chris, to his credit, having been through founding another company, exiting, he knew that you can absolutely lose yourself. You can go
Mm.
crazy.
Mhm.
Um, you have to put your own oxygen mask on before you can help others. And I think that if the founders aren't healthy and level headed, things can go sideways so, so, so quickly. So we really did and still, we really have tried to see it as a marathon, not a sprint.
Mm.
Um, and just try to take care of ourselves.
I love
So
the oxygen mask thing. That's I'm gonna steal that. It's really good. Do
please
do
do.
you do you let's go back to that point. You brought him up, and you brought up a point earlier I want to kind of reconnect to. You know, there's an asymmetry in I imagine personal wealth. So I'm sure at least he's a thousandaire, I imagine. And so his runway is presumably different than you. So even if you are both philosophically aligned, and it's, I mean, that's hard enough with founders. It sounds to me like you kind of have the same mental model about how to build a business and what good looks like and what bad looks like. The only misalignment, I sounds like, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is
Mhm.
he has a little more runway than you.
For
How do
sure.
you
Yeah.
solve for that?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, there's so many, there's so much, everything's a trade-off, right? Like, there's
Hmm.
so much. And there's different ways that we've negotiated, like, what our rules are going to be in the business. Everything is a trade-off.
Hmm.
Who gets paid first is out of necessity. So,
Yes.
but I think that Chris gets it. I'll also preface, no trust fund on that end either. I mean, Chris grew up in a tiny village in the middle of England, not much going on.
Yeah.
So, both of us came from kind of, a small upbringing,
Hmm.
and we know what it feels like to feel insecure about finances. We know what it feels like to not have access to opportunity or economic or social mobility. Those are things that we really deeply resonate with. So, I think through that lens, he always kind of understood how I was feeling, where I was at, but also what really motivates both of us.
Hmm.
So you just have to kind of work around your specific situation. Like, every business is different, every founder is different. Um, and even after a successful exit, to his credit, it didn't change his mentality around life and business.
That's good. Yeah.
Nothing is infinite, and it doesn't matter, how well you do in an exit. Lightning often doesn't strike twice for people, right? So, um, you never, I think that Chris and I still believe that we have a lot to prove. But you can't just look through the lens of like, oh, this worked out once. I can throw money at this thing, it'll work out again. I think we sort of took that same scarcity mentality and we really live with that every day. Um, and
But
I
how do
think
you
that's worked
like?
well.
You don't have to, go into excruciating detail here, but like I'll give you a counterfactual or a counterexample so that you can sort of reflect back on how you think about this, if you want. I've seen businesses where, you know, one there is an asymmetry in wealth,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
inevitably the business required more capital, and inevitably the person with significantly more wealth was able to do what they needed to. So you could
Yeah.
eat more equity. You could say, well,
Mhm.
I could put another 100K into the business,
Yeah,
but what do you get for that 100K? The problem is if you
for
if
sure.
you destabilize the equity,
Yeah,
you change the motivation of the other person on the other side. So it could be completely
exactly.
logically fair. Where you put in $100,000, you probably should get another 10% or whatever the
Yeah,
number is,
yeah.
or 5% or whatever the number is. But
Yep.
then all of a sudden you went from being equal partners. I'm making this up. I don't know what your equity arrangement is. You went from 50-50 to 60-40. And all of a sudden
Yeah.
that changes from a co-ownership to are you the boss and are you
Totally.
deciding who gets sold? How did
Totally.
you have to, do you put paperwork around that? Do you have conversations about that? How did you solve for that? Or did you have to solve for that
Yeah.
yet?
Yeah, no, I
Or
think that's a
never?
really fair. I think that's a fair question, and I think a lot
Yeah.
of companies have been in the same position. Um, like you said, so yeah, thankfully we've never had to put money into the company
Okay.
yet.
Okay. Okay.
What we have
That's good.
had to trade off is not taking money out, right? As far as
Right.
salaries. So we, thankfully got to revenue very quickly, and we had to get to a place where we were actually like able to put money back in, hire people, all that sort
Right.
of thing. So knock on wood, we don't have to give it our own cash injection. Things are ticking along nicely.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as, figuring out a structure that's motivating for both founders, like we knew early on, a lot of businesses fail because there's founder fallout.
Yeah.
That's human nature. It happens all the time. Chris and I have always been incredibly, incredibly aligned with the vision, values, and goals of the company.
Yeah.
And we have completely opposite skill sets. So I think that we've always just valued each other so much where if we butt heads, it's always on really reasonable things. It's never been on the direction of the company, our vision, goals, and values. So we don't want to fumble that. It's really hard to find someone that you can work so easily with,
Yes.
but also can do all the things that you suck at,
Yes.
and vice
Yeah.
versa.
Yeah. And to your
So
point of like having philosophical alignment is kind of almost the most important thing.
for
You can
sure.
figure all the rest out in a weird way. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and some of the hardest things we did was trying to figure out like what is motivating for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just another problem to solve. It's just another problem to solve. And I think that if you have that core foundation of, sharing the same beliefs and path that you're on, it is solvable. The major things were never an issue for us, but absolutely, like, did I take a salary first? Yeah, I
Yeah.
had to.
And
There
then
were
like again,
trade-offs.
you don't have to say, but is it like, and then I'm gonna bank that salary for like, does he say, I'll bet you took 50K? I'm owed 50K. Like there's no equity change. Just like I'm owed 50K. At some point we're gonna get that 50K, and at some point I'm gonna, so to keep
Yeah,
the
yeah,
peace and everything. Is that the kind of solutions that you folks
totally.
came up with? Yeah. Okay.
You have to keep it balanced. And then the other
Yeah.
thing too is, equity is a whole other can of worms because we have lawyers telling us like, hey, if you do want to raise one day, 50-50 actually isn't attractive to investors. Like
Right.
who's flying this plane, right?
Right. Yes.
So even before we had these conversations about like, hey, one of us needs to get paid first, you also have to, sometimes you have to make sacrifices that has nothing to do with you. It's just for
100%.
the company itself.
Yeah.
And while we have not taken a cent in any kind of funding, we want to build something that is robust but also has a foundation where if we changed our minds we could do that, right? So yeah, it's not necessarily even about the founders. Sometimes you have to think, well, what is just best for the business?
Right. And I want to look in the other direction in just a second in future. I just have another question. How do you fight?
Oh, that's such a good question. We squabble like siblings. I don't know. I have a
Yeah.
twin sister, and
Okay.
so it's funny because having a twin, there's a twin thing. You can like I can look at her and I know what she's thinking.
Right, 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 right.
Um, and I think that, building a business with somebody is like you are just gonna see the best and the worst parts of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is laid out so quickly and so raw. So we just have a tremendous amount of respect for each other. And it's like, something will not go my way or his way, or we'll just be having a bad day. It
Yeah,
happens. And we are so solution focused. Just,
right.
I think our personalities are like, this sucks, but here's how we're going to fix it. And I'll send off a fiery text. And, I know exactly how he's going to react. He knows exactly how I'm going to react. And then we
Right.
just figure it out. Like we redirect that energy into a solution. Um, we have a tremendous amount of respect for each other's time, life, mental health.
Yes.
And that's really a non-negotiable for our entire team. I mean, I think it's not just the founders that we need to care about, it's our whole team. There are people doing really, really important work. Like I am so grateful every day for the people we found that have joined us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about us, it at some point becomes about like you have other people to worry about, what's best for them.
Yeah.
So you're not first anymore. But when we squabble, it's like a quick jab and then it's solution.
Right. Okay. So you're like emotional. I know that an emotional moment will happen and I know we'll get through it. And then the next step is you don't like set up a fight ring and then you fight for a while and then nothing like
I'm sure some of our employees would love that, but
that.
I think I I yeah, we're so solution focused and I just know Chris knows how I'm going to react. I know how he's going to react.
Yeah.
We know which buttons to push and which ones not to. But again, the foundation of like our belief in our values, our goals, our vision, the mission, that's unwavering. So we just get on with it.
So let us look. Speaking of getting on with it, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Good question. Um so we've kind of hit a point now where there's around 10 of us. It's getting a little bit exciting. The first few years were really tough, and you don't you don't sometimes have the chance to even think about that. We've kind of entered a point now where we're like, what is this company? What is it in the next year, 2, 5, 10? um Really what we care about is to keep building a really really great product. We just want to grow. So we've got some really really great growth plans that are doable. That's a big thing for us, is just kind of stay the course.
What does grow
We
mean?
have
Like have more carriers, have more SMBs? Like do you want to
Yeah.
what different geographies? Like what?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So our niche really is less than truckload freight in Canada and the US.
Hmm.
That is such a massive market that we
Hmm.
don't really see a need to go outside of
Pass.
that.
All right.
It's what we do, it's our core competency. There's a lot of business there. Um, as far as growth goes, that always involves bringing on more carriers, growing our team, growing our revenue. I don't want to associate growth with like headcount, adding headcount. I think
Hmm.
that's an easy mistake to make.
Hmm.
We layer in, employees as we find the need, but our team's naturally going to grow. We have different ARR goals. Like we've done the math. We have evenings where we're like, Kate, let's like open a bottle of wine and like start getting the juices flowing, start talking about, in our wildest dreams, what does this look like? And then what's realistic? So we have a pretty lofty, goal for where we want to hit, by 2030 ARR. And all of that really has been built on us still retaining full equity and control of the company.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We think we can get there pretty much without having to raise.
That's my next question
Thankfully,
is like, do you like, I get it's a matter of speed probably more than it is a matter of capacity because you've proven out a business model
yeah,
that works.
yeah,
So it's more about
totally.
timing.
I think a big part of it too was we just had to prove out that model, and we
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of, you get a little bit of runway, you get a few years under your belt. A big thing that we had to prove out was like, well, how do we actually scale this? Like we've built a product. It took a few years to build a product that could scale.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have that, and we had to figure out like, could Google bring revenue? Like, is Google where we're going to find our customers? We hired
Yeah.
an amazing marketing company, Nathan Young with FYA, and he's kind of taken over that. And thank God, because it's not our core competency. So we're kind of like, let the plumbers do the plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
That proved out a lot of stuff for us, where we were like, okay, if we spend this X amount of dollars, it translates into X amount of revenue. And
Right.
then once you start seeing that consistently, you can start making plans around that, right?
Well, and if you don't mind me, so this is why I'm asking, especially given what I think your ICP, your ideal customer profile is.
Mhm.
It's not like, well, there's three banks and we're going to go after the three banks. It's like
Yeah.
lots of small little operators, which effectively becomes B2C style marketing, go to market, right? Which at least in the tech space is I think it's everywhere. It's just expensive. You need a lot of freaking money. And so are
Yeah.
you treating, I guess the two questions are you like operating like a SaaS business? You said MRR, you said ARR, and
Hmm.
we're talking about customer
Hmm.
acquisition costs, really. Are you
Yeah.
thinking about it in a business model as that? And then I will then go back and ask you the capital question again.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways you can look at it. Like, of course, there are KPIs and metrics that are SaaS based that we have to look at.
Sure.
We are a tech company through and through.
Mm.
Um, but there's a lot of things that also like don't apply to us. There's a lot of kind of like vanity metrics that venture backed companies I think really care about that we just
Mm.
don't, because like if you're venture backed, they really care about moving the needle on all of these, kind of sometimes vanity metrics to give the illusion of
What
progress.
metrics you don't care about? Like, for example, if
Oh
you could
God.
name.
I mean, we care about the major things like revenue, what are our margins? Like, are we
Yeah.
making money on these sales? And
Are you
retention.
bothering with like CAC to LTV ratios? Like, are you bothering with that crap? No. Okay.
Not yet, honestly, not yet. We
Okay.
like we're stretched so thin as well so early on that you just have to focus on like what
Just
matters,
get money
revenue.
in and cost less. Yeah. Okay.
Totally, totally. So that's
But
really our focus.
okay, so but then like let me loop back and ask the question again. As a jerk, you're going to your marketing folks and you're saying, listen, if it's Google, it's Google, or whatever. So you're getting some data on the cost of acquisition, or at least the
Hmm.
top of funnel acquisition of customers. And because they're SMBs, you're spending money on AdWords and lookalikes and all that other stuff. Um, one of the reasons, at least in the B to SMB space, which is like B2C, one of the reasons you raised venture in the past was because it's like in the product market fit world, it's I don't know how much it costs, so I just
Yeah.
shotgun money, and
Yeah.
eventually I hope don't run out of it before I figure that cost of acquisition out. In your case, you're
Yeah.
coming at it from the other side, but you're still
Yeah.
acquiring people all over the place. So how do
Yeah.
you cost effectively, like if you don't have a huge amount of capital, how do you go and get these people in a way that actually is statistically significant so you can be like, it seems to be this?
That's where that's where having someone who knows what they're doing comes in.
Okay.
Really, that's really where it came in. So we were like, here's our budget. We've tried this a little bit ourselves. We've seen that there can be some success with it.
Yes.
Um, I think working with someone you trust, like we've started to outsource, things like marketing, right? For
Right.
example,
Why
working with
not
someone,
insource it, I guess, is my question first. Why outsource it in the first place?
it's not our core competency, right?
Okay. But
We would
you
never.
don't think it should be part of your business's core competency.
Um, yes, but initially we just needed someone to tell us what to do.
Got it.
Like
Yeah.
Chris and I are not marketers. I have a marketing degree. What does that even mean? I mean, I graduated in 2016. Like things have changed.
Yeah.
So
I have a
we don't,
psychology degree.
right? Right?
Yeah.
Things changed, and we know what we do well, and we would rather kind of, bring in some experts to tell us what are we doing, what's working, what's not.
Yeah, but was
So
he like, okay, now I need $500,000. Like, I'll give you $30 and a hat. Go figure it out. You know what I mean?
no,
Like,
we know what a reasonable budget is. So that's
okay,
the thing. We're
okay,
reasonable. We knew what a
okay.
reasonable budget is, and
And
we
you
were like,
had
if we
that
can,
budget that you could actually do those things at
we
this
d-
point. You could
we did,
actually
yeah.
spend it. Okay.
But I'm not talking. I mean, I'm not talking like a $50,000 monthly Google ad
Oh,
spend. That's
yes.
unnecessary. But
Yes.
we had a budget where we were like, okay, do we hire more people or do we do a Google test and see how that pays off? And a big part of it was like, you're always kind of like gauging. You're turning different levers. Like, do we hire? Do we invest here? Do we do that? You just have to like pick something and run with it. Give it an honest chance. So we threw a couple $1,000s at Google. I remember when we
Wow.
first started trying this, a couple $1,000, see how it pays off. Give it a reasonable budget and see what we're doing. And I personally never thought that that channel would work for us. I was like, freight shippers aren't on Google. Like, come on.
Yeah.
What you don't know what you don't know. You just
Right.
have to try. So you got to set your biases aside. And yeah, it ended up working really well for us. And I think just with the
Is it
nature.
is it people coming through Google? Is that, I mean, you don't have to say, but it's like that seems to be a channel. Or is it like LinkedIn? Like, is it weird or is
Yeah,
it exactly what you'd expect? You're just bidding on the right words and
I think it's just bidding on the right words, like, figuring out what
fascinating.
that is. And again, like our industry is really lagging behind in
Yeah. Yeah.
pursuing these types of channels. So for example, there's not like we were discovering the other day, there isn't, a website where you can rate a bunch of carriers. Like there's just a lot of stuff kind of missing in the space where we were like, that's weird that that doesn't exist, but nobody's done it.
Yeah. Yeah.
People, freight carriers, for example, they want to go out and find more business. They hire more salespeople to go bang on doors.
Yes.
That's and I
Yeah.
realized years ago, our customers, they don't want to see me. They
Yeah.
just don't.
Yeah.
They're busy. Like they're like, why
Well,
are you
maybe they are in
here?
that sense. They're very Gen Z, But I'm just kidding.
Yes. No, but I mean, things are changing, right? People
Yeah.
have different ways of working. If you can find someone at their computer, amazing. And Bing, I mean, I never thought Bing would be a thing. Bing is a thing for this industry. Like again,
No kidding.
you don't know what you
Yeah.
don't know. So I
They're all
think
running Windows laptops that had as that as the default search engine probably, and then voila.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, you've got the boomers you got to target. That's a big
yeah.
part of it. Like, you got to take off your own hat and how you function sometimes and actually think about who's the customer. There's a wide subset, but the boomers operate very differently from the millennials and the Gen Z. So go find
There you
where they're
go.
at.
Yeah, except for talking to you. Other than that, they're very boomer. So, okay, so are you, so going, like, just to round things up, looking towards the future, you're like,
Hmm.
we are running these experiments about customer acquisition, it sounds like,
Yep.
seeing where people are, seeing how we can fill our pipeline a little more effectively. You've got the machine, the sausage maker works. And I think I heard you say, and correct me if I've misstated it, but you're like, I don't think we need debt or other kinds of capital because there is a flywheel here. It may take a year or two longer than if you took venture, but also it changes the math quite substantially, and it's worth
Yeah.
doing it at the pace that you can run those experiments and see those things. Is that how you're thinking about it? And just reinvest and grow?
Exactly. I
Okay.
think again, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That's worked really well for us.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
We used I think that's a Navy SEAL quote, something that they use in training, but it applies. It really does. I like
Oh
it.
yes, I'm a Navy SEAL. I knew that. I totally knew that.
Yeah, same.
No, it's good. It's good.
But yeah, I think we're sticking to the playbook. It seems to be working for us. Nothing's ever off the table. I mean, if you would have asked me a year ago what we're doing, my answer would have maybe been different.
Yeah.
Every day changes. You have days that are beyond your wildest dreams. You have days where you're like, maybe we should. I
Yeah.
don't think we never want to have our blinders on, but we used to think if we don't move fast enough, someone's going to overtake us. Maybe this industry is going to start moving really, really quickly and things are going to change. I had lunch the other day with one of our carrier reps and I asked him, I was like, so, and I knew what the answer was going to be. I had to say it out loud. I was like, so what are you guys talking about? AI is kind of a big buzzword right
Yep.
now. What are you guys doing, company wide to implement AI in some way, shape, or form? And he was like, huh? We're not even, what? Like, nothing has changed. So we're not going to get complacent with the pace we're moving at, but I don't think you can compare it to if we were just another AI company competing in the space, for example. It's just our industry does not move
Yeah, but I
fast.
mean, I would need to say like there's the Canadian company. I believe it's fundamental. It's the Canadian founder, Wabi, just
Mm,
raised $1 gazillion, and she's quite an impressive woman. And I
yeah.
saw her fancy truck that drives itself. But at the end of the day, in your particular business, what's happening is you're removing two pieces of paper, but you still need all the other pieces. Even if a robot drives the truck,
This
it's
is what I talk about all the time.
yeah,
Everyone, sexy self-driving trucks.
yeah,
That's really exciting. It makes for a great news story, but how do you get the freight? How do you get the customer? And then how do you get their freight from their warehouse, their manufacturing facility, onto the sexy self-driving truck? How do you track that entire process, get it unloaded correctly,
exactly,
and
exactly,
build that? So I
yeah.
love the sexy self-driving trucks. I think it's important that we innovate in every area of this industry, but nobody really has wanted to touch the really ugly, unsexy areas, which
Yeah.
is the fax machines and the phone calls and the emails.
All right. And the last question I'm going to ask you today, we're recording this at the end of 2024. This will air in early 2025. How do you folks talk about exits? Do you plan those things out? And if so, like, how do you, I'm not saying like, do you want to exit now? What's the number? It's more that how do you think about it? Are you building this to be a durable generational business that you're going to have problems convincing your children to run? Or are you building this for sale? Do you have those conversations?
Always.
Yeah.
I think as a founder, those conversations they're your kind of motivator in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Chris and I, this isn't his first company. This is, one of many that he started. And this is officially my first. So,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
we know what the potential is with it. We have a number, of course. I think when you give yourself a number, it's very motivating. It also gives you something to work backwards off of,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, which is necessary. But also, why do companies acquire businesses? Are they buying the tech? Are they buying the team? Are they buying the revenue, the customer base?
Customers. Yeah, yeah,
Right? Are they buying the data? There's a lot of
yeah,
different
yeah.
sides of our company that are valuable, so that are starting to scale. So we're thinking, what would that actually look like? I think there's a lot of different ways that we could take it. That being said, the underpinning of all of that is we want to build a really strong, robust company that solves real problems in a really novel, elegant way. So we continue to just be razor focused on the customer experience. I think if we continue to perfect that, everything else does tend to fall in place. Um, that sounds oversimplified. It's
It sounds freight
really,
simple, actually, but
yes.
yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's the right answer. That is, I mean, that's very succinct, and it does make sense. Have you got to the point? I'm going to ask an unfair thing. Have you got to the point, because this happened to me, where people start calling you and offering you stuff? You're like, I would like to buy your business for 3 waffles, and you're like, thank
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
that's great. No, has that started happening, and has that ever caused you pause yet, or are they really offering 3 waffles, and you're like, thanks, just call me.
It has. No, it,
Yeah.
it has started happening. And it's funny because we don't look at it. I mean, I laughed. I said there's two moments where you feel like a real business. When you get your first cease and desist for something stupid and frivolous,
Yes.
I was like, we're a
Yes.
real company
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
And when someone approaches you wanting to buy you and you get all the scams, you're like, this isn't real. And then they send 5 follow-ups and you're like, hey, what is it? Oh, it is real. Um, so,
Yes.
it's flattering. We're not in a
Yes.
position where we're looking to exit. We have a
Yes.
great company. We're really proud of it. We have a great team. If we get to that point one day, it would be a much different conversation. It would be, a very specific buyer. We kind of know who a potential, who would potentially acquire us.
Hmm.
And what is it that they want? Our
Are,
industry
are you
right now is,
building for that, or are you just building adjacent to that? And if they come, they come. I'm not saying like you're designing the company to be bought by a specific company, but you're like, I know where this could go, and I'm going to make it
yeah.
not hard to do that if I wanted to.
Yes. We are building with that in mind. And I
Yes.
think,
Okay.
Chris, my co-founder, him having exited last time, he understands the process of like when you start entering those negotiations, they're going to do due diligence,
Yes.
and so we always wanted to build a company that would be strong as a company, not just as an acquisition target,
Sure.
but
Sure.
a
Sure.
great company that we could keep going for the long haul. But every little thing where it's like, okay, if somebody acquires us and they're doing diligence and they pop the hood on our code, how clean is it? How easy is
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
new team to come in and use this? So all
Right.
of those little things we build with that in mind. But
Smart.
it's not our only end goal. I think, again, a company that would be acquirable would be, great revenue, great team, really phenomenal tech, and so we're just focused on those things.
Cool.
Um, yeah,
I
we'll
think
see.
though the one criticism I have of you used long haul once at the end of that, and I think you need more truck puns in the description of your company, because that's the stuff that makes me happy.
I
Anyway,
said pop the hood and you never
oh
called
yeah,
it
you're right.
out.
I totally missed that. Oh my god, I have to let me re-edit that part again.
I was
Well,
so excited to say that.
so Natasha, thank you very much for coming on the show. If people want to check out Freight Simple, where do they go?
FreightSimple.com.
That's pretty simple.
Excellent.
Well, it was a really great conversation. I really look forward to kind of revisiting where you end up, and or I should not even where you end up. I kind of want to revisit you in the middle of where you're going, not at the end, because the end is the easy part. The middle part is the interesting. So thanks for taking the time to
Yeah.
spend with us, and that was in English. But thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. I'm legally obligated to tell you to like and subscribe to the show, and keep on building. And we'll see you on the next episode.